such a beautiful church. Thank you. And Michelle, thank you so much for the invitation. And I've got to say, I am deeply touched by churches who do everything that they can to minister amongst themselves to the families of their church. You can tell I'm biased. Marriage and family therapy is what I do, and it's a huge passion of mine. But when I see churches engaging families, and when I see them engaging children and marriage and really coming together, my heart is filled with hope. Yes, the church, we're doing it right. We have to be able to nurture inside of our church. So this event, serve them diligently, just as another reminder that God puts us where we need to be to nurture us and our families. And that is, I'm preaching to the choir, right? That is so important. It's so important. So, yes, I am from Loma Linda, California, but I feel like I'm from everywhere. I did have an opportunity, a blessing, to visit several churches in this area. So as my husband, my sister, and I were driving towards this area, we're like, oh my goodness, the Norwalk church is down this way. And oh, Anaheim is not too far. And oh, you remember when we came, this looks familiar. And this is really great. So thank you for making me feel at home. I have to say that I usually do my seminars in Spanish, and I see that there are Hispanic congregants here. So if I shoot out a word in Spanish, I'm going to need your help, because I think in Spanish, I dream in Spanish, and a lot of the times I digest my thoughts in Spanish. But it's so beautiful to be able to speak a common language that is the language of love, the language of spirituality, the language of Jesus. And so I have no doubt that if I have a word that I need to translate, you guys will help me, right? We got this. The Holy Spirit has been known to let people speak in tongues. So I have no doubt that if something needs to happen, he will facilitate that. So I offer up myself to him. May I be used as an instrument in his hands. You know, going through my postgrad degree, I had a class that was focused on the formation of families. And I've gone through many classes, but this one was unique in that it was purely, how do I say this? It was structural. It was very structural. And we were looking at how families look like and how families function, and not so much theoretical or abstract, but literally. And we had to put it out there for everyone to see. And so one of the assignments was a genogram. And genograms, as many of you know, it's a family tree, but it's a little bit more than that, because it implements the skill of mapping relationship. And it's not just dates and data and facts, and so much more interactions. Can you picture that, how that would look like if you would map out the family interactions in your family? I mean, I bet yours would look as clean as day, but mine was a little interesting, to say the least. And I remember as I was going through this genogram, and I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do it anyway, I'm going to do it right. So I bought a lot of arts and crafts, and I love this type of work anyway. So I put this out in a huge pinup board, and I designed these little fabric. Anyway, I don't even want to get into detail. I really got into this project. And as I was overlaying the top layer of interactions, I was a little dismayed. I had to map out 4 generations of my husband and my family. And as I looked to one side of my husband's family, well, my husband's family was on this side, it was very, very nice. Everyone, functioned the way they were supposed to, or at least that's just the way it happened. It was very clean and cut. And then this side was just a little messy. There was divorce all over the place. There was a lot of addiction. There was a lot of conflict. There was a lot of interesting secrets and issues. And I don't know how I felt about my husband seeing that. I was like, I think he knows a lot of these things, but to just see it that way, there's a vulnerability that takes place of wow, this is who you married. I'm sorry. Why don't they do this in premarital classes, right? And needless to say, there was no judgment from his part. But this stuck in my head as I was going through this activity. And one of the most interesting pieces, I have to say, was finding the secret keeper in the family. The secret keeper is not the gossip. The secret keeper is he or she that guards family secrets. And it's not in a way to expose and judge and create conflict. More so, the secret keeper holds these secrets to protect the family and to explain the functions and the patterns and interactions. And so one of the assignments was to find this secret keeper. Now, our family is fortunate enough to have 2 secret keepers. And so when the secret keeper gets found, you know you have found the secret keeper because they will let you in on the family patterns if they're approached in the right way. You have to be able to show them that you care for the family, which is why you want to know. Now, you'll see that this is different from the family gossip in that you come and say, oh, I just had this issue, and the secrets come out. That's like this different approach to maybe, finding out the family issues. No, the secret keeper will hold them and will only give them away to he or she that approaches without judgment. And so I found the 2. And I started to have this conversation about the things that I was looking at in our family. Why? Why was there so much divorce? Why was there so much addiction? Why was there so much family conflict? And I got the most interesting details about the why. Before I had the why, I was pretty scared. As you can imagine, looking out into your family and seeing this makes you think about your generation to come. At this point, I didn't have children, and all I could think about was, will my husband and I make it? Will we make it so that my daughter or my son, whoever comes along, understands that a family is important? And I was stuck with those fears and those questions and the doubts, of course, plaguing my head. And so this simple genogram really became a catalyst for thought. And as I understood the reasons why my family looked the way it looked, I could not help but realize and dig into literature as my interest was piqued. Why do families break? Why do families face dysfunction? And I had this question going on and on and on in my head, and I dug into literature, and I dug into the books, and I really soaked in the data. And I realized that there is so much dysfunction. And there are very good reasons why. For some families, it's trauma, loss. Loss and trauma so great that it breaks you apart. There is violence, the mismanagement of childhood uprearing or upbringing, bad habits. There's a lot of ignorance many times in the way families should be and should fulfill our needs. Selfishness also breaks families. The I want, I need, I feel I don't love you anymore. I don't want to be here. This isn't okay for me. This isn't working for me anymore. And therefore, are you out there with me? Yeah, we do. We do. We break. Bad decisions is also part of us breaking. Fear. And as we look into fear, it's interesting because fear, as well as anger and a lot of other emotions, are neutral. And I'm not going to stand up here and say that fear itself causes brokenness. But when we stick to this fear and we let it transform into a very negative emotion, which is paranoia, we cannot help but take this paranoia and teach it. We think the world is a bad place. Somebody or everybody is out to get me. All men are bad. Women, etc. And we have these fears rooted in good reasons, maybe, and it becomes paranoia. And then we do what? We teach this to our loved ones. And that's where we are broken. Paranoia breaks us. Anger, that turns into ira. Here's a word I'm throwing out to get the rage, rage, or there's bitterness as well. It breaks you, and then it so happens to become this interesting process where you, the broken, break others. Brokenness breeds brokenness, and families, sadly enough, are breeding grounds for brokenness. We cannot help the broken but break. And so families are broken in some generations and continue to be broken in others. And it's very, very hard to change these patterns. For those of you who have changed a family pattern or who have changed yourselves from being broken and have healed and have gone through a wonderful transformation and are sitting here today and are a testimony of God's good work in you, you can attest that it's hard. I have not met someone who sits in my office and tells me, yeah, that was easy. Let's do that again. Or I'm just going to go ahead and tell my daughter to do whatever she wants in life because she could really get out of it whenever she wants. I don't hear that. I usually hear, I made these mistakes and I do not want my kids to go through the same thing because it's hard to live a broken life. And yes, that's real. I love hearing that because as soon as I realize it's hard, and as soon as I realize there's brokenness, as soon as I'm aware of the things that make me weak, I can give that up. I can really give that up. Because ultimately, if I can't, God can. God has to. God has to. Now, when we talk about dysfunction, and I said this a little while ago, families are facing dysfunction. I'm often faced with this question, families that come in and we do family therapy, and they say, so what is dysfunction? And as I would love to give, all this research on the definitions, et cetera, it's simple. Dysfunction is to not function. Now, do not get me wrong. Function is not equal to perfect. We function because we're a system, but we're not necessarily functional. So we could be doing things wrong, but that's the way we work as a family. And while some people come into my office and talk about the way they do things, and they say, but that's not our problem, this is our problem, I am left with little to do because I cannot fix something that's not broken. And it's a matter of perspective. And I get some families, for instance, there was a couple that came in, and they were talking about their teenage daughter, and their teenage daughter was rebellious, or so they said. I'm not, So they came in and they said, my daughter needs this and needs that and this and that. I'm like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. That sounds like a thing we could definitely work on. Now tell me a little bit about you. Tell me about your marriage, how you guys met. Oh, no, we're not married. Okay, tell me more. I'd love to hear more, exploring, where do you guys meet, and what culture are you from? And I love culture, and I love exploring how this makes us who we are. And anyway, we got into this interesting conversation about how her family hated his family, and it was a Romeo and Juliet thing, basically. I mean, why? You know the story. So the families really were at war with each other because of what had happened in the past. And now the daughter was dating someone they didn't approve of. And as I talked to them and I said, how does couples therapy sound? Would that be an option that you guys would consider? Oh, no. Can you just hear it? We're fine. We're good. Really, we are. We're just here for her. Now, and this is what I hear, definitely not what they said, but this is what I hear. If we could just have you babysit her for an hour a week, I'm sure she's going to be fixed. Like, that's an expensive babysitter, if I don't mind me saying. But sure, we could work this out. The problem is that when we teach our children brokenness, and children are very resilient, and they're very forgiving, and we should learn from them a lot. I have learned so much from my baby. They become healed faster than we do, and we bring them back into a family that still remains broken. And this is where I'm faced with an ethical dilemma. Do I or do I not? Do I go forward and tell this child that I'm here because she was brought to me? And the underlying message I'm giving her is, you are the problem. When I know professionally and for sure that she is not, and I ignore the root issue. To function is not equal to being perfect. It's actually not even equal to being traditional. We talk about the traditional family. We talk about the way things are supposed to be. We talk about normal, and interestingly enough, what is normal is no longer functional. Do you know what I mean? Go out and look at what is normal now. Bring me back a show, a TV series that shows you normal in the way that is healthy and functional. Besides Madam Secretary, because that one's my favorite. But give me normal and I'll show you dysfunction. What is normal is no longer functional. And so we're left with this very confused idea, then what is functional? And I am in complete agreement with this confusion. We present things that look normal, that look functional, that look healthy, but are quite the opposite. And yes, my question also is the question we all have: what is functional? You know, as I talk to a lot of my friends who are pastors, they always point me back to the Bible. And it's one of the things that I've held a little bit of a qualm about with my friends. And they say, Vanessa, always go back to the Bible. And I'm like, sure, I'm not one to say that we shouldn't. I mean, I was brought up with this, and I totally agree we should. I mean, I think it sounds like blasphemy if I say we shouldn't. I totally agree we should. But when I talk about functional families, I go back to the Bible and tell me what I find. Just tell me what I find, right? Can you shoot out some names of some dysfunctional families in the Bible? Abraham, the father of our faith. Okay, we could just stop there. If that is the foundation we hold for all of our belief in our faith, preaching to the choir, right? I mean, that is confusing. Who else? David, the person who walked with God. Samuel, the most inspiring life that I see in the Bible, in prophet, in the, wow, I want to be like Samuel. But I see his kids. I'm like, what happened to the theory here? There's a disconnect. I'm sure Samuel did family worship. Can I just throw that out? Is it okay to just throw that out? I'm sure he read his Bible with his kids. I'm sure Samuel's kids were in the temple praising God at some point. And I'm left with this question. So, what happened? No judgment, but I'm curious. What happened? Where does it happen? What other families? You really do bring it back. You do. Adam and Eve. Dysfunction. And we can trace it back to selfishness. We can trace it back to, whatever. Dysfunction, for sure. I mean, they killed each other. I know a lot of families who get divorced. I know a lot of families who abuse each other, but not many families who kill each other. Now that one's one for the precedent, right? That's a little harsh. Who else?
Mary and Joseph.
Huh.
Do that one.
Who said that? I love that. Mary and Joseph. Not married. We're looking at a cultural nuance. In that time, that was the most dysfunctional you could be. In Spanish, we have this phrase that is completely translatable, but we say, le tapas el sol con un dedo. We tried to cover the issue with a little Band-Aid. Essentially. And that's what the culture saw at that point. For us, it's the, premature 7 month that is 9 pounds. And she just, happened to go on vacations to US, and now she has a baby. Huh. We really do try as a culture to disguise dysfunction. So yeah, we could talk about Mary and Joseph. We could talk about the conflict evident in the sibling relationship. We could talk about how it looks like to have this son compared to that son. Could you imagine growing up in a household where your sibling is literally perfect? How many of you kind of grew up that way? Maybe don't raise your hand if they're here, but there was 4 of us, 4 girls. And while we got along most of the time, and the rest of the time we did not, we loved each other, but we did, we shone in different areas. And that was okay. That was not as hard to live with. But when you're having the same compete, the siblings compete for the same type of attention, that must be hard. Everyone knew I wasn't smart at math. That was okay. But I was good in other areas. Well, my sisters were smart at math. But can you believe being in a household where they're all studying the Bible and Jesus is like, me? I know. I got it. I don't know. It sounds like there might have been issues. And we could talk about, I think I'm safe to say, almost every family in the Bible. Almost every family in the Bible. So you tell me to trace back to learn about function and health of families in the Bible, and I am still left confused. You know, it's not enough any longer to keep asking ourselves, why not? It starts sounding like an excuse sometimes. Why are you divorced? Why are you angry? Why are you not happy? It almost implies that there has to be a good reason, a good enough reason for you then to say, oh, no, I totally get it. And while there are good reasons, and while we do have families who are broken, I really appreciate the hope we find in the Bible about healing. And I've given seminars to families who are broken, many of the times through trauma and crises and bad decisions, etc. And some of the times it does look like abuse, and some of the times it does look like domestic violence, or it does look like divorce. And I've never had a moment where I did not feel the grace of God. And I have no shame in standing up in front of people and saying, whatever it is your family's broken up, it can be healed. And it does get healed. Because He heals. And that's where I find beauty. I find so much beauty in learning about function because we're systems. And I tell this to a lot of my Hispanic males that come into therapy and say, why am I here again? I'm not crazy. And I say something like, just give me 5 seconds. Let me talk about a car real quick. He's like, okay, I think I could do that. Listen to talk about cars. You're the motor. You are very important to this family. You run this family in a lot of ways. You are strength. You are wisdom. You are important. I mean, I think I got them there. I think that's very important to keep reminding the authority figures in our family that they are important. And while we feel sometimes very insecure about decisions we make as parents, it's important to hear ourselves validated because it's hard. And so when I tell this to Hispanic fathers, who are many of the times accused for a lot of the brokenness in the family, I see their faces change. Oh, I'm not coming to that place? I'm not coming to that place where I'm going to be told that I have to be less angry, where I have to be less defensive, where I have to be more involved, where I have to be less disconnected, and I have to see less TV. And I say, You're in the place where you're recognized because you are important. What I don't say is we are broken, but we still are important. Broken pieces do not get put into the trash. Broken pieces have to be restored. Yeah. And so mom then is next, and she says, and I tell her, you know what? You're like the transmission. And there's a lot of things that go through you because you make the decisions, and they function. And she's like, yes, I needed to hear that. Thank you. And I tell the kids, you guys are the wheels, and everyone gets a part of the car. And I say, what happens now if one of the wheels pops? Now, we can't just make another kid. I mean, you could, but that'd be mean. And this is where the families sometimes stumble And it's hard to communicate the seriousness of this process that the family goes through together. If the tire pops, no matter how strong the motor is, no matter how well tuned the transmission is, if you just put fluid day before, it does not matter. If the tire pops, the car stops. If there's something bad that's coming into your family, and let's just use the example oil. You're not putting the right oil. Oh my goodness, I have to self-disclose a little bit here. I went to a gas station. I notoriously do not like putting gas in the car. And I went to this gas station and I was on 0 miles, okay? This is kind of embarrassing. And so I come up to the gas pump and I was already exacerbated because I was like, I'm on 0 miles. I don't know if I could make it. And I stopped. I'm like, okay, gas, Shell, yes. Thank you, God. And so I get out and I, bring the pump to the car and it doesn't fit. And I was like, go. And I the nozzle, I push it and I say, okay, it's close enough to the tank so that I could just pour the fluid in. I'm like, go. And I kept pushing regular. Go. Needless to say, this is kind of embarrassing now that I talk about it in front of people, but I saw this guy and I said, listen, sorry, not my first time, I promise, but could you just take a look at this weird nozzle that I have over here? I just have no idea why it's not going in. He's like, that's diesel. Yeah. I mean, you guys knew it, but I had no idea. He's like, that will ruin your car. I'm like, I'm glad they made it a different size. That was super smart. If that diesel goes inside my car, he knows it. My Mazda could be almost brand new, and we're working our butt off to pay that car off, and it could just be the cheapest car in the world. It won't work. I love what we talked about with music. We turn this music off because we cannot imagine that coming into our homes. We could not imagine that TV show influencing the brain and the mind of our young children. We could not imagine these words infecting the way we talk to each other. Because we have to watch what comes in as much as we have to watch what happens within the system. That's the way it works. That's the way it's supposed to work. And so when we see ourselves stalling in our families, and what do you mean you hate me? Could you just, really? That's the way you see me. That's disrespectful. And I can disrespect you if you want. That's interesting. That tells you something. That tells you that either something that is coming in isn't healthy, or something that is happening within isn't functioning. And that's why we are a system. That's why we are families, that every part is considered important. I can just imagine the pain that comes from making a bad decision at one point of your life when identity is taking form and you're young and something happens and your family says, we're going to get the spare tire, you're good. I'm just going to leave you on the side of the road here while we keep going. See ya. You decided to have kids, okay? You went and had sex with your boyfriend, so now you figure it out. Essentially, that to me is, let's just go ahead and get the spare. Or let's just go get a brand new tire and pretend that you don't matter. I imagine the level of pain that could bring inside of a family that gave the message that Jesus' love is unconditional. That a family who goes through divorce, which is painful enough, which is traumatic enough, and yet faces judgment. from church, from the culture, from society, and from their own family. That's pain right there, and that's brokenness, that's risk, that's vulnerability for brokenness. And sad but true, we break people too. It's not fair to stand up here and say, yeah, the church heals. It does. Jesus heals. It does. But sometimes the church has become responsible for breaking, for putting people at risk. Not Whittier. No, just, hang on. Just 1 second. I just want to make it clear. Yeah, we're good. So other churches that are not Seventh-day Adventists, no, just kidding. We break people. Any comments? No? Yeah, thank you. I have only been able to come up with two things that are practical, the practical view of function in our families. Two things. And if you would like to elaborate with me at the end, I would love to take notes and pick at your brain with your experiences. But two things have come up to me so far about what it looks like to be a functional family. And while you may function in a way that does not look like any other family, that's beautiful. That's diverse. That's okay. But there has to be these two things. One, unity. We talked about the car. Unity. We have to come together. And two, harmony. We have to function in a certain way that is producing peace, that is producing happiness, and that is producing harmony. Does that make sense? The first is we work together, and the second is we are in harmony. How do we get there? How do we get there? And I do take this back to the Bible, and I leave you with 3 ways in which we can get there to unity and harmony, to function. And I tell this to my clients. They ask me very important and serious questions. I say, I cannot answer without pointing you back to truth. Because what I say could be carried away, but what is true will not. And I think I want to leave you with that, and I tell every family. So these 3 things point us back to that which is functional, and God does leave us with a manual for that. So while our families might not look functional in the Bible, there are voices of truth here that we can take to become functional. And I point you back to Proverbs 22:6. First of all, what do we get from Proverbs 22:6? What is one of the ways we get to this? It says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. We have 2 things implied here. I don't know if you see it. One of them, the most obvious, is training them, and that implies boundaries, implies rules, and while that is very important in families, and I tell them, you have to have your rules up somewhere. Write them up. Make them up together. Be creative. If you guys like working with your hands and crafts, do this big, huge thing, this mural, and put it up. If you guys like to talk about things, then write it out like a commandment list. Whatever it is, families have to come together and set boundaries. Work on rules together. But what is another thing implied that I think is the additional piece that families, sometimes we don't get to do as efficiently as setting rules, because we're super good at setting rules, is the effective communication that comes with it. I don't think that this child who is trained up in the way he should go will grow old and not depart from the ways of God if he wasn't communicated this in a loving way. There's no way. Because I've seen a lot of children trained in this, and they're not even old and they're gone. So there is something additional. There's an additional piece that we have to add to this, and that is, how do you train them? That will also make a difference. And I add this word, effective communication. Does your child agree with the rules that you set? Are they part of this process of setting the rules? And I had one client that came in, and the dad was like, he just does not obey about anything, and he's a disaster, and he's out of control. And I look at the kid and say, all right, tell me, what are we missing? What is your problem inside the family? And he's like, well, I'll tell you. There's no rules. He was like 10. I was shocked. I was like, that was really easy. I love this kid. And he says, there's just no rules. I have no bedtime. I have no time to just limit the TV. I could do anything I want at home. I could even hit my sister and nobody gets mad. And I said, okay, I hear you. That's impressive. So what should we do? He's like, look, let me tell you, I've thought about it already. If we could set my bedtime to 9 p.m., I could get enough sleep to wake up in time for school, which has been a big problem at home. I'm not joking. This is the way he said it. And he says, and then if I hit my sister, I think I should get a really strict punishment. I'm like what? Now at this point, I was intrigued, really intrigued. And he's like, maybe I'd stay in my room without food the whole day. Like, that sounds like child abuse, but I'm listening. And then if I don't do my homework, I should be punished. Like, wow. Like what? I was kind of scared this time. Well, maybe I should have to do the dishes and the lawn, and I should take out the trash every single day. And I'm like, Dad, how does this sound? He was like, so now we collaborated on making rules. Kids are much harsher to themselves than we want to be from parents. We don't want to be the mean parent. We don't want to be, we just got, all right, set it down. Let's be strict. And the kids are like, oh, that was it. I'm just grounded. Oh, okay, that's fine. But we have to collaborate together on making these rules, because while kids are harsher and parents are nicer, or vice versa, it could be, we have to come to a collaboration. We have to come to a decision together, because being a family doesn't mean I tell the wheels where to go, and I tell you and I train you to do whatever you have to do because I said so. Whoever wrote that book can come talk to me. No, it's because we said so, and here is why. And that's the way God tells us his commandments. You do this because of this. You do that because of that. And we say, yeah, you're giving us the dignity of rationalizing this, of it making sense to me, and I will obey. And sometimes it's as simple as, do you love me? Then keep my commandments. And I say, yes, Lord. That's good enough reason for me. So that's Proverbs 22:6, effective communications and boundaries. Number 2, Ephesians 6:1-4. Please, let's have someone bring this up for us. I need help. Ephesians what? 6? 1-4. Kids, what did you hear?
Be nice.
You heard obey your parents? You're trained well. What did you guys hear? Ladies, over here. What did you hear with this verse? You heard obey your parents too? Yeah, I know. That's where they trick us. I'm with you on that one. I am here to tell you that you are partly right, but parents have a big responsibility too. And this is where we stop at some points in the Bible, right? Yes, women, be subservient to your husbands. Let's pray. Yes, let's all obey our parents. We'll see you next Saturday. Well, not today. We're talking about emotional intelligence and interpersonal skills, where, yes, one party has responsibility, but the other party does as well. And that's the beauty about interacting. And emotional intelligence implies that while you are aware of your boundaries and your emotions and the things you like and don't like and things that you want happen and what not to happen, you also have the responsibility of realizing, what the other person doesn't like, with the emotions that they're going through, and how to navigate that relationship. So parents, because you are the rational, intelligent, fully formed frontal lobe human being, then yes, you have a much larger responsibility here. God places you as the external hard drive for your children. Just stick with that thought for a second. We want kids to choose what they want to do at 18 years old. They have to already know. And we say, go for it. Just choose. Just tell me what you want. I mean, I don't want to be influential here. I don't want to be the one blamed later. And I'm thinking, frontal lobe's not formed yet. Do not give them a car. Do not send them off to college without, looking over the things they know and don't know. Supervise them. Be in contact with them. Because while we as parents have to, yes, be obeyed and teach our children to obey because we reflect the relationship of the Father, we also hold a responsibility to not provoke our children. And I wouldn't just stick with wrath. I would stick with a couple other things. Do not provoke your children to pleasures that they can't control. Do not provoke your children to unhealthy lifestyles. Do not provoke your children to unhealthy relationships. Do not provoke your children to brokenness. Yeah, anger's there, but I just deepened it a little bit. Interpersonal skills, because your children reflect you. And while they bring kids to my office, I don't say this often, but now you guys are in the know. I tend to know what's going on at home before the parents come see me. It's a reflection. Which leaves us with the last part in Colossians 3:13. Who's the brave one now? Colossians 3:13. Who can read this for us? Colossians 3:13.
Forbearing one another and forgiving one another, if any man give the quarrel against any, even as Christ forgave you, so also ye do.
I was asked before I got married, what would be the thing you could never forgive your husband for? One of those trick questions, right? And while a lot of my friends had the perfect answer to this, I always felt there was something wrong implied in this question. And this was the verse that I think stuck in my head. Always forgive as Christ forgave you. And I'm thinking, would there be something Christ wouldn't forgive me for? would there be something I wouldn't forgive my husband for? That's huge accountability. It's scary to say it out loud to the person you love because it's also vulnerability. You have license to do whatever it is that you choose to do and the bad decisions that your sinful nature provokes you to do, and I will be here, forgiving you and not standing in judgment. That's a tough pill to swallow. And that's the other piece in family functioning. Because the one day I forget to fill up my tank, guess who's coming to rescue me in the middle of the road? No one. Oh, I'm so sorry. My husband, my family, my loved ones. They're the ones I have to be able to count on because they are ones who will unconditionally forgive me. Now, this is one where I see families have the biggest issue with. I say, you have to have effective communication. Yes. Yes. Tell our kids we have to. Yes, totally. Let's have workshops on that. And then we say interpersonal skills and emotional communication. Wow, that's super interesting. Tell us more. And I did my thesis on emotional intelligence. So they're like, bring us the books and hit us hard with them. And then I get to unconditional forgiveness and they're like, are we praying yet? And while I'm tempted to stay here for a while, I am only going to point you back. We forgive as God has forgiven us. Did he forgive you completely? If this verse would say, as Christ will forgive you, we could be kind of on the fence about it. All right, I'll decide. Let's just see what, Judgment Day looks like, and then I'll come back to you. In this case, it's how Christ forgave you. And because the Bible is a testament for a complete erasing of sins, as far as the east is from the west, and as deep is the ocean, so God's memory is in forgetting your sins, and it's transforming your heart to one as snow. There is no excuse for you not forgiving your family, your husband, your wife, your child, or your parent. There is no excuse that's reasonable to God's ears because he says, you're my child, and I taught you well. I want you to reflect who I am. Amen. My family has broken chains. I am proud to say, as I look back now, every generation has tried to do things different, as I know you have. And while there is shame inside the very seams of our stories and experiences, I know there are chains you have broken. My family has broken chains of oppression, sexism, religious oppression, classism, divorce, and addiction. And I am proud to say that when we see families breaking chains, we ourselves are given hope that we can. So, let's look back to the families in the Bible. Some of them have broken chains. If you remember every story that you told me, those stories led up to a great breaking of chains. And every story points to the cross. Every story was important in you knowing that no matter how shameful this family's story was or is, there is always a breaking of chains. And that's the cross. Jesus came from addiction and divorce and shame and racism and death. And there's hope. And sometimes you're that hope. I have to believe that I am that hope for my family, that I can bring them closer to Jesus, that I can bring them closer to hope and breaking these very, very, very oppressive chains. And so families of Jesus, families in Christ, I invite you today, think about what chains you have. Think about the work that lies ahead and do something. Can I say today? Today, Sabbath, in remembrance of Him who broke our chains, to break chains that still hold your family prisoners of dysfunction. Thank you.